Welcome back, everyone. We're doing another new episode of Indie Reads Aloud. Today in the studio with me, I have Rich Nelson. He's a new to me author. I just met him recently in Muskegon at the Lakeshore Arts Festival. How you doing, Rich? Welcome to the program.
I'm doing fine. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Absolutely. I love introducing new authors to readers and to people who listen to the podcast. I just have so much fun learning about your work. For those of you who have not met Rich before, let me give you a little bit of his background. Rich Nelson is a retired college instructor and social worker. He was formerly a columnist for the West Michigan newspaper, the Norton Lakeshore Examiner. He has contributed essays to the publications of the American Humanist Association, the International Buster Keaton Society, which we'll talk about in a second,
Yes.
and the Gay and Lesbian Review. Rich lives in Muskegon along the shores of Lake Michigan. He dabbles in photography, kayaks Michigan rivers, hikes the plentiful woods and dunes of his native state, and loves summer afternoons at the beach. Who doesn't? Formerly a runner, he completed the Chicago and New York City marathons. You are a stronger man than I. And his favorite travel destinations have included New York, Paris, Venice, and Maui. You are a well-traveled, well-read, well-experienced human.
I love travel. Yeah, some of my adventures appear in my books.
Fantastic. So tell me a little bit about the Buster Keaton Society.
Yes,
I'm very intrigued by this.
Yes, there's a wonderful, rich chapter of Muskegon history connected to Buster Keaton when he was a child. And I write about, I'll read a short passage of that when I get to that. The vaudevillians were traveling the circuit for 9 months around the country, performing their acts, but they're looking for a summer respite. Joe Keaton of Buster's father started a actors colony in the Bluffton neighborhood of Muskegon, which borders Lake Michigan. And he invited other vaudevillian families to come and enjoy 3 months of relaxation away from the traveling and the vaudevillian circuit.
That sounds a lot like going on vacation with Robin Williams.
Yes, that's a wonderful comparison. And this Bluffton and the summers were the only opportunities for Buster when he was a kid to live out his childhood. He could swim and play baseball and play practical jokes on people. And the rest of the year, he was traveling with his family act as part of the family act. And
so the rest of the year he was working.
Yeah, he was working on the stage every night. He was on trains and boarding houses. He couldn't be a kid. So Muskegon was his childhood.
How and absolutely cool.
I write about that as my book because my grandparents, my father's parents, immigrated from Sweden and settled in the Bluffton neighborhood in the early 1900s at the same time of the actors colony. And they knew the vaudevillians. My grandfather played baseball on the local teams against the vaudevillians on the Bluffton.
How fun. This is a whole chapter of Michigan history I didn't know about. Yes. I'm going to have to do some more digging into that.
Oh, yeah. And the International Buster Keaton Society meets here in Muskegon for their annual conference every October. And they show Buster Keaton films and have programs about Buster's life and career. And it's a wonderful time. People come from all over the globe to attend this 3-day conference in Muskegon, which is coming up in early October.
That sounds like a ton of fun.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to Google that and learn more about it.
Yes, please do.
Fantastic. Yeah. How wonderful.
Yes.
So the story that you're going to share with us today is a book titled This Tender Man, My Father's Story, which is a biography of your father's life. Tell us a little bit about this book.
Well, it came about, the primary focus of the book is his service in World War II. He was stationed in the South Pacific with the U.S. Army, and on the island of New Guinea, while stationed there, he contracted malaria and nearly died from that disease. And the thing is, I did not learn anything about his war experience until after my father died in 1993, when I reached out to his fellow soldiers from his company. We never had one conversation about his war, which is so, I think, typical of soldiers returning from war, wanting to leave that behind and moving
Absolutely,
on with their
sure.
life.
Well, and
And
especially soldiers from World War II, they didn't
yes,
talk about it at all.
yes, and he was part of the greatest generation, but he never spoke of it. So, from his fellow soldiers, I learned of his story, of their stories in the Pacific, and I was able to reach out to them and fill in the gaps of my father's journey. And only then could I imagine writing a book about his life. But
That's
the
extraordinary.
Yeah, but the book also spans the entirety of his life, from his grandparents immigrating to Muskegon from Sweden, his early Depression years during the Great Depression when he was coming of age, his his post-war years, and then his final battle with Alzheimer's disease at the end of his life. Again, the
What
focus.
a fabulous thing that you've done
Yes,
to create this legacy for your family.
yes,
So
yes.
now generations forthcoming will know about their ancestor. I think that's a
Yes.
marvelous idea.
Okay. I'm hoping it'll be lasting. It's now in 4 libraries, as a matter of fact. It's in the
Fantastic.
My book is in the library of the World War II Museum in New Orleans. And also, there's a World War II museum in a small island country in the Pacific called, it's Vanuatu is the name of the island country. And they have a World War II museum, and my book is a part of their library. So through that
Fantastic.
exposure, I hope that will be a lasting thing for my father and his
Absolutely.
life. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and a great testament to your family as well.
Sure.
How
Absolutely.
wonderful. I
Yes.
am really interested to
Okay.
hear a little bit from your book. I understand you're going to read 3 separate sections for us.
Yes. Yes. I'm going to read 3 passages. One introduction, just to give you a taste of the book's message. And the second passage will be what we spoke of Buster Keaton and his childhood
Okay.
summers here in Muskegon. And the last one will be near the end of my book, which sort of wraps up trying to come to terms with my relationship with my father. So,
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to hearing you read.
okay,
Please, when you are ready, take the microphone and read aloud.
I will do that. Thank you, Diana. Again, this is from the introduction. My father nearly died of malaria in the jungles of World War II, New Guinea. He enlisted in the army at 29, older than many of the men with whom he served, though still young and vigorous and hopeful for the life ahead. The disease he was stricken with on that steamy and unforgiving Pacific island ravaged his body, and he never fully reclaimed his once healthy self. He came back to his Michigan home in the last days of 1945, damaged by war, though determined to leave his ordeal behind, returning to work, starting a family. Like many soldiers who experienced the trials of war, he shared little about his tour of duty. But the scars were there, mostly hidden from others, often minimized or dismissed outright. He sacrificed much throughout his life without grievance or self-commiseration. My father was Woodrow F. Nelson, and this is his story. This is also the story of the hundreds of thousands of soldiers who endured the harsh conditions of the tropical Pacific after Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor on the Sunday morning of December 7th, 1941. No one sent to the Pacific theater operations during the ensuing World War II years was prepared for the intense heat, the impenetrable jungle, the insistent bugs, and the elusive, tenacious Japanese troops. Soldiers on all fronts, Americans, Australians, Japanese, proved susceptible to the diseases indigenous to the region, malaria the supreme culprit. They were ravaged by the disease-bearing mosquitoes raining down on them by the millions. The New Guinea campaign, 1942 to 1944, mounted by the United States and Australia to retake the island, a valiant struggle ultimately preventing Japan's domination of the entire South Pacific region, came, though, with a costly and lasting price. Edward J. Dreyer of the U.S. Army Center of Military History wrote, quote, "The battle casualties tell only part of the struggle in the jungle wilds. Men on both sides collapsed, exhausted from the tropical heat and humidity. Soldiers shook violently from malarial chills or from a drenching in tropical downpours. The same monotonous field rations, sea rations for the Americans, left soldiers undernourished and susceptible to the uncountable tropical diseases that flourished in the warm, moist jungle." Dre added that, quote, "It was the ordinary American soldier who endured the worst deprivations that the debilitating New Guinea climate and terrain could offer." In James Campbell's book, The Ghost Mountain Boys, an exhaustive account of the battle for New Guinea, General Hugh Casey called the exotic land the ultimate nightmare country. One soldier interviewed by Campbell reflected on his experience, quote, in the beginning, we were all young, healthy GIs, eager to conquer the world. In a matter of weeks, long before we met the enemy force, all of us had been transformed into ghosts of our former selves." So that gives you a little sense of my main focus of the book. Now, the second passage, as we're talking, talks about the Bluffton summers of Buster Keaton and the Actors Colony. An elephant roaming the Bluffton streets, spirited baseball games on otherwise languid Sunday afternoons, pitting local sandlot teams against the summer visitors, weekly performances by the vaudevillians at the pavilion on the beach of Lake Michigan Park. These were among the delights brought to town by the vaudeville entertainers and their families, livening the Muskegon summers in the early years of a new century. They were genial, leisurely times, longingly remembered by Buster Keaton in his autobiography, My Wonderful World of Slapstick. Quote, "As for me and the younger children, we just got into bathing suits each morning on getting up and never took them off until we went to bed." They were the transient visitors during the summers of the early 1900s, welcomed by the residents, among them my grandparents, of Muskegon's Bluffton neighborhood. Theaters across the country with no air conditioning to comfort audiences and performers closed their doors during the summer months. The winter circuit for many vaudevillians proved financially successful, providing the luxury of a lingering, relaxed summer break from the stage. The Keaton Family Act had established itself as one of the premier vaudeville stage shows, billed as the Three Keatons. Joe Sr. and his wife Myra added their 5-year-old son, Joe Jr., by now dubbed Buster, to their act in 1900. Their popularity grew, audiences particularly drawn to the comedic and physical prowess of young Buster. Though the young performer relished the attention and acclaim, the success of the Three Keatons was tempered by the unceasing physical roughhousing inflicted on him by his father during the act, Buster thrown around the stage like a plaything. Though, as if in training for his film career, he learned to cushion the tumbles, his acrobatic finesse limiting the number of bruises sustained and keeping serious injuries in check. In a 1914 interview with the Detroit News, Buster, 19 years old, looked back at his physical stage skills. Quote, "The secret is in landing limp and breaking the fall with a foot or a hand. It's a knack. I started so young that landing right is second nature to me. Several times I'd have been killed if I hadn't been able to land like a cat." He would need this nimbleness perfected in the years ahead on the national vaudeville circuit and utilized so well later in his silent movies. The Three Keatons continued to refine their breakneck-paced routine, full of pratfalls, physical roughness, playful skits, and rapid one-liners, interspersed with songs by Myra on various musical instruments, most notably the saxophone. Their act exemplified the zaniness and popularity of vaudeville, a colorful menagerie of acts and talents wildly beloved by audiences nationwide. Though the family stage act served Buster well in developing the astonishing physical stunts he later executed in his films, the toll of such a grueling life as a young performer must have been formidable. He lived in a world populated mostly by adults, a world of trains, boarding houses, and nonstop roughhouse shows. The welcome respite of summer, during which Buster could play out a boyhood absent on the national vaudeville circuit, was the restorative interlude he coveted. His childhood awaited him in Bluffton, and he fondly remembered the Muskegon summers throughout his life. So that's a little taste of Buster Keaton and the Muskegon history of the vaudevillians. Now, at the end of the book, I talk about my relationship with my father, and I describe it as a tenuous but amiable relationship because he didn't talk too much about his past. So this is near the end of the book. Dad led an ordinary life, yet he left a notable and lasting mark on all who knew him. World War II kicked a bit of life out of him. His vigor and strength diminished, yet his sense of commitment absorbed during his earlier years never wavered. He preserved the traits he brought forth from his youthful days of fierce loyalty and devotion to others. His childhood family, the companions of his youth, and the brothers from his war all helped cultivate an inner strength he applied to both common and challenging times. When I thumb through the pages of the family's photo albums and study the pictures of my father, I see a man looking back at me from his early years who radiated contentment and untroubled buoyancy as he moved through his young life. His friendships appeared deeper, richer. He seemed more willing to give life a chance, to take more risks. It appeared that the distress of war and the responsibility of family and work in his post-war years brought about a more conditioned approach to living, often weighing him down, wearing him out. His story evolves from the playful escapades with his adolescent friends to survival in a strange land in the company of his wartime brothers. They were only boys when they marched off to war, taking on a Herculean and often unheralded adult burden. My father became a changed man, looking at and reacting to life from a different, more guarded vantage point. He was more tentative, cautious, and secure in daily routine. You look back at a person's life and reflect on its importance, that it had meaning, that it helped shape your own life, and thus has lasting impact. I regret, years after his death now, it took the stories of his fellow soldiers to help me understand him in a more meaningful way and appreciate the man, his journey through war, and the sacrifices he made. I regret that the person his Army companions knew and held in such high esteem was the man and the father I only truly discovered after his death. Yes, and remorse that we failed to connect in a more available and meaningful manner while we had the opportunity. As I ventured into my adult years, I became wrapped up in shaping my career path and working through personal challenges. Again, to this day, I grapple with lingering remorse still pulling at me, that I made little effort to uncloak my real father, the real man. But be that as it may, this is what I do know. He was not a demonstrative man, his emotions constrained. Hugs were rare, the words "I love you" not part of his everyday vocabulary. However, I know I recognized at some level back then, and no more so now, that the love was there. He presented it in his unassuming manner through quiet gestures and worthy sacrifices that often went unnoticed and unsung. There is a passage in Richard Powers' 2021 novel, Bewilderment, that resonates in a deeply palpable manner. The book tells the story of an astrobiologic father, recently widowed, raising his brilliant yet troubled 9-year-old son. The youngster keeps up with his father on topics of astrophysics and the pursuit of life beyond our planet, his profound observations constantly surprising his dad. In one conversation, the son offers this contemplation, quote, "Dad, if you went to sea or off to war, if something happened to you, if you had to die, I would just hold still and think of how your hands move when you walk, and then you'd still be here." I remember my own father in similar ways, his easy demeanor, his dry, subtle humor attached to a sly smile, a warm look affirming his affection for those around him. With such evocations, he is still here and remains a resolute presence in my life. Actor Jeff Daniels, in the September 5th, 2021 interview on the CBS program Sunday Morning, described his late father as knee-deep in decency. This pure and absolute proclamation encapsulates my father, my dear father. And after my attempts in this book to come to terms with the unanswered distance that existed in the relationship with my dad, I once again lean on the words of others to work toward valid and meaningful closure. Author Peter Richmond's reflections on his father, who also saw the war in the Pacific, have helped me toward that clarity. Quote, "But I have now seen him through the eyes of those who knew him in the war, and I have come to realize that he was not so much an extraordinary man as a good man, one among many in extraordinary times. And now that I know this, maybe now I can go on with my life." My dad's love, humility, and decency are lasting, and I wish I could tell him what I have learned, the lasting gifts he gave me, how he shaped my values, my character, my life, and the hope in writing this book that I may leave something behind that has meaning for others. What I would give for another hour with him, to tell him what I have uncovered, what I now clearly know, that his life had worth, a worth that endures. After all these years, and now nearly 30 years after his death, I finally, in a belated yet complete way, understand and value his unpretentious and unsparing love, a love from the heart of an ordinary man, a generous man, a tender man, my father's love. That's it.
Well done. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for
Sure,
that
you're
reading.
very welcome.
That sounds like a really fascinating story. I absolutely love the idea that you've decided to leave a legacy for your family
Yes.
in honor of your father
Mhm.
and all the people that came before him. But I'm curious, after all the research you did and all the people you spoke with who knew your dad,
Yes.
what was one of the most surprising pieces of information or anecdotes that you were able to uncover? What was something you didn't really know coming?
I didn't know a lot, as I mentioned. There's a lot of things I could cover with that question.
Is there something in particular that stands
Um,
out?
I think the conditions they endured in the South Pacific. I think when I did my research, I read a lot of World War II books,
Hmm.
and very few covered the conditions they endured. I mean, the heat and humidity, the bugs, the mosquitoes. So many of the books covered the major battles of the war, Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima,
Sure.
and books that and battles we learned about in our history textbooks in school. But very little is covered about what they face. One situation, when my dad's company first arrived in New Guinea, they set up their base camp where they would spend over 7 months. And in the first, they endured torrential rains for 24 hours straight while
Wow.
they're setting up their base camp.
I can't
And
imagine pitching a tent in those conditions.
right, right. And one soldier said, "We were never dry." So,
Wow.
and that was just, I thought just that statement alone says a lot. So I
Sure.
think that was the most revealing thing I learned about from their fellow soldiers. They kept on repeating that time and time again.
So to juxtapose that, is there something that you uncovered that you found surprisingly humorous about your dad that maybe you didn't know before?
Um, Maybe not humorous. I just know he was well respected.
Hmm.
And when he did have malaria, he spent several months in a field hospital and a hospital ship. And several of the soldiers wrote me back saying that I spent a lot of time with your father when he was in the infirmary, and just trying to encourage him, because he was near death,
Sure.
and he was very weak, very fragile. And I write in the book how much respect I have for his fellow soldiers, for they were brothers.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
they were brothers from the end until the end.
Yeah,
And
more so than I think many genetically connected brothers are.
yes, right.
Yeah,
And they experienced things that we cannot even imagine.
sure,
You know, I mean, the ordinary citizen of
sure.
what they went through. And that you know, that's not surprising then that they didn't want to speak of it.
Yeah,
They wanted to, you know, they came home, they reunited relationships, they got married, they raised a family, they went back to work.
kind of started over, right? You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
that chapter is closed.
yeah.
Let's start the new chapter,
Yeah.
right?
And they
Yeah.
were when they did speak of the war, they were very humble about it.
Hmm.
They didn't brag about it. And I think that's why Tom Brokaw, the newscaster, coined the phrase the greatest generation, because they certainly were.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for
Okay.
taking the time to read for us today. I'm really pleased that you're keeping your family's legacy alive,
Yes.
and
Yes.
I look forward to seeing more from you in the future.
Good. Very good. Thank you so much, Diana.
Thank you.